Okay, let's look at some petroleum geography now in terms of where's this stuff at and where does it go to in the world on a daily basis. When it comes to petroleum, who's got it? Who's gotta get it? And who makes the green on it? Because the answers to those questions aren't necessarily the same places all the time. Just because you've got a lot of oil, don't mean that you produce a lot of oil. And just because you produce a lot of oil, don't mean you make a lot of money on oil, depending on what country you're in. So there's a lot of terms, a lot of stuff packed in here to see what's going on with petroleum on planet Earth. So we're going to look at reserves, production, exporters, and importers. Who's got it and who sells it and who has to buy it. So when it comes to oil, we're going to look at who uses it. That's the consumption part of the equation. Who's got it? That's the reserves you have in the ground. Remember, oil is a fossil fuel. It's a finite resource buried underground somewhere. There's only so much of it. Who has that? That's the reserves. Who is actually making it? That's production. Who needs it? Those are the countries that import it. They got to buy it. And who makes the real money on it? Those are the countries that export it, that produce it and sell it to you. And again, these aren't always the same answers to these questions. So we'll start off with the easy one. Maybe it's so easy we shouldn't even be dabbling with it. Consumption. Who uses petroleum? Well, everybody. I already covered this in the last video. It's somewhere between 35 to 50% of every country's energy base is petroleum. Again, we're not even talking about natural gas or coal or any of that other stuff. Petroleum is the single most used natural commodity on Earth to produce energy really everywhere. So the easy answer is just everyone on planet Earth, every single country uses oil. And that's that, huh? Well, not really. Obviously, not everyone is using it at the same rate in every country on planet Earth. So can we detect some spatial patterns in terms of consumption? We'll just stick with the top tier. Who consumes the most oil on planet Earth? I bet you know the #1 country already, and that would be the United States of America. The United States of America every single day consumes. This is uses. This isn't producing. We're not talking about production or any of that stuff yet. We're saying uses. Every day the United States burns up over 19 million barrels of oil. Those numbers are just astounding. Every day the United States burns 19 million barrels. Followed by China that burns up about 10 million barrels a day. Japan, let's just call it 5 million barrels a day. India, just over 3 million barrels a day. Russia, 3 million barrels a day. And the rest of the top 10 goes Saudi Arabia, Brazil, Germany, South Korea, Canada. Okay, that's the top 10 big users. And I do want to reinforce this if you miss the numbers. I don't often stress a lot on, oh, you need to know these numbers. Not really. But I'll stress this. I'll say this for the second time. The United States uses 19 or 20 million barrels of oil a day. China uses 10. So the United States pretty much right now in history, in the year 2015, uses twice as much as the second one, which is China. But guess what? China and all those other countries are rushing forward to burn up more oil on a daily basis too. Woohoo! We're plunging the planet into a carbonated state, but that's environmental stuff. We'll talk about that another time. Just back to the consumption. What are the patterns you can see here? Top 10, I'll pick on a few in particular. U.S., Japan, China, Russia, Brazil, Germany, South Korea. Yes, no African country made the top 10. Not many Asian countries besides China and Japan made the top 10, and that should be tipping you off why those two. They're the most industrialized, richest Asian countries. Oh, yeah. And we start to look at all the other places. What's the most industrialized, richest place in South America? Brazil. They're top 10. What's the richest, most industrialized place of North America? That'd be the United States. They're top 10. So the theme here is, when it comes to consumption, obviously, industrialized, richer countries use more. Surprise, surprise. But think about this for future reference. Isn't all of the rest of the world trying to catch up with the living standards and industrialization rates of the rich world? Answer, Yes. So we see a future where countries like China's already number 2, probably will be number 1 someday. India's already in the top 10. Their consumption is going to go up. Places like Brazil, their consumption is going to go up. And a whole bunch of other countries we haven't even listed that are going to be getting richer in the coming decades. And their usage of oil, everything remaining a standard what we are right now, we're not predicting any new future breakthroughs in energy technology. If everything stays the same, you have a whole bunch more oil usage coming up from a whole lot of other places that are up-and-coming economies. Indonesia, Turkey, Brazil, Mexico, the list could go on. That's the major theme, though. Consumption countries, the highest consumption, industrialized, richer places. Okay, let's go to the second one. The reserves. Who's got it? Those are the countries that use it. Who's got it? Well, oil reserves are technically and economically recoverable oil. And I don't really mean to start splitting hairs here and get all technical. But when you hear the term oil reserve, Saudi Arabia has 10 quadrillion barrels in reserve, that means that technically they can get it out, and economically, at current market rate, it's economically feasible for them to pull this oil out of the ground and sell it at a price, okay? So it's feasible, possible, it's proven, we know the stuff's there and we can get it out, okay? Reserves may be for a well, for a reservoir, for a field, for a nation, or for the whole world. So depends on what area you're looking at is how much reserves they have. Different classifications of reserves are related to their degree of certainty. So depending on your source, statistics, actual numbers are disputed all over the place. If you look at OPEC numbers, they'll be different from CIA World Factbook numbers, they'll be different from Wikipedia entries numbers, will be different from the countries themselves numbers. So different folks give different figures, and there are, of course, different types of oil, ranging from cheap and easy to extract, most of the Middle East, to oils that are locked up in tar sands or shales, things that are harder to extract and are perhaps more difficult and more costly to extract. So simply saying, hey, this place has 1 trillion barrels in reserve, it's not really giving you the whole picture, okay? That's not all of it, but you can't invent oil if you don't got any. So you might as well report the figures and we can pick out some patterns along the way. A few other things about reserves. When you hear proven reserves, those are all reserves claimed to have a reasonable certainty, usually with 90% confidence, of being recovered under existing technological, economic, and political conditions. Okay? So this is proven reserves, we got this. If we don't even advance any more technology any past where we're at right now, we've got the tools, we've got the talent, we've done the surveying, we know with 90% certainty exactly how much oil is under this ground, and we know for certain we can get it out. And the political climate's okay to get it out. Remember, I added in economic and political conditions here. If a civil war breaks out, if ISIS takes over your oil fields, well, then it's not so certain. But proven reserves are, yes, we know how much is there, and we are sure, 90% to 100% sure we can get it out. As opposed to unproven reserves, which are based on geological and engineering data, similar to what you would calculate with proven reserves, but it's more of an estimate. Because they're like, yeah, we know there's a bunch of oil down here, and we can calculate how much, but we're technically or contractually or politically constrained. We're not sure we can get it out. And I'll just stick with the technical one. If you can have some oil in some sort of rock and you can detect it and measure it and be like, oh, we know all this oil's down there, but it's in a certain type of rock that's really hard. You can't just stick a straw into it and extract it. We have to mine up the rock and process it and do all this other things to it. And technically, we're not so sure how much of it we can get. And actually, economically, it may not be worth doing it yet. Does that make sense? So you may have unproven reserves that in the future may turn into proven reserves. But proven is definitely we got it. Unproven reserves are more, it's probable and possible that we can get this much out, okay? I want to throw this last zinger in for you, too, just to make you smarter about the wider world in which we're now in here in the 21st century. Oil is a finite resource. I've covered that 10 times. There's an amount. I don't know what the number is. Nobody does. But there is a number, and that's all there is on planet Earth. There's been a common misperception, I believe, that we've discovered all the oil. We know where it's all at. And that's that. And so we're already starting to run out. Every year, the proven reserves and even the unproven reserves get smaller and smaller and smaller as more and more countries consume it. That is not right. That is not true. Now, there's a finite amount, but we don't know what it is. And to be honest, you should know this, a whole lot of the probable has become the entirely possible in the last couple decades as technology has increased, as our capacity and understanding on how to find this stuff and measure this stuff has increased, on finding new oil fields altogether has increased. As the Arctic ice is melting, it's uncovering potential huge oil fields up in the Arctic. Those are new. Brazil's doing deep, deep, deep ocean water drilling now, and they think they've got a bunch. That's new. And even besides new stuff and technologies which can find new stuff better, new oil better, you also have to consider that new technologies help the refining and processing a whole lot. So say 100 years ago, you get a barrel of oil out of the ground, and by the time you finish cleaning it up and fixing it and doing everything you need to do to it, you only have a half barrel left. Well, now the technologies are so good, you pull up a barrel and you still have 90% of that barrel left after you've refined it. So technology has added a big increase to proven and unproven reserves. They are not going down. I don't mean to be confusing here. Is the ultimate finite number of barrels of oil on planet Earth going down? Yes. There's only so much. But numbers and stuff that we measure and reported on, those numbers have actually been going up. We're not running out. For those that think that we're going to somehow run out of oil in the coming century, I don't see it, and neither do any of the oil companies. But now I've waxed too poetic on proven reserves and unproven reserves and all that stuff. Let's get to the geography. Who actually has all the reserves? And this number, or these places, will change as technologies increase in the future too. Let's just pick off the top 10. This is going to sound strange, because it always strikes me as strange. But if you're looking at proven reserves, we know it's there. We have the technology to get it out. And that's all I'm going to talk about right now, proven reserves. Venezuela is number one. Venezuela? The country in northern South America? Yeah! Venezuela has like 296.5 billion barrels proven. All right, I bet you didn't really think about that. It always amazes me. The next one in line is perhaps more obvious. Saudi Arabia. Now we're getting back to the Middle East. This lecture is supposed to be about the Middle East. Saudi Arabia, 265.5 billion barrels proven in the bank. Well, it's under the ground, but put it in the bank, it's there. Then, believe it or not, Canada. Again, this is why I love doing this little mini lecture for you here. Canada, 175 billion barrels proven. Yeah, and now it gets back to what I was just talking about. Canada's got a bunch of oil locked up in tar sands and shales that it's kind of hard to get it out of, and it's costly to get it out of. So Canada's the third biggest proven reserves on planet Earth, but you've never thought of them as a big oil power because they're not. Technology may increase soon, and there'll be gangbusters. Maybe it'll be the new Saudi Arabia up there. I don't know, but that's where it stands. Now back to the list. And I'm just going to pick on some random ones here in the top 10. Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, UAE. Bam! There's that Persian Gulf Basin now all covered. All 5 of those countries in the Persian Gulf Basin are in the top 10 proven reserves category. And to finish it off, Russia, another major power player in the petro world. Libya, Nigeria. Nigeria down at number 10. That rounds out the number 10, actually. And just to throw in a few other ones from the Middle East, Qatar is number 12, Angola, and Algeria. So that's the general take on where is this stuff at. If we backed it up and looked not just at the individual countries, but on a regional scale, now we can say, pulling back this graphic I showed you last vid, world oil reserves by region. Now we see that given Saudi Arabia, Iran, Iraq, Kuwait, UAE are all top 10, yes, that makes sense that the Middle East region has 50%, virtually half of the world's proven oil reserves. Africa's got about 8 to 10%. North America, hey, that's where you live, has about 13 or 14%. Canada, I've now pointed out, but the United States produces a lot of oil. So does Mexico. All three countries in North America are big oil producers. Central and South America with 20%, 1/5. Venezuela's a big player in that, but Brazil's an up-and-comer too. Europe, yeah, they ain't got much. And the rest of Eurasia, less than 8%. So Middle East is still, as a region, the dominant in proven reserves, but don't count the Americas out, because if you put North America and South America together, you're looking at another 30 to 33%. A third of the world's proven oil reserves is in the Americas, and the Middle East has half. All right, now that's where it's at, and again, those countries in that list are subject to change in the future, but probably not much. That top 10 is probably not going to change much unless some great technology comes about that figures out a way to get oil out of places that we couldn't get it before. Those are the countries that are liable to be the top 10 proven oil reserves for some time to come. Again, unless they discover some huge volume of oil under the Arctic or Antarctic or someplace like that. Let's get to who actually produces it, though. Because again, it's not a one-to-one scenario. Just because you got a bunch don't mean you make a bunch. So, who produces all of the world's oil that the United States mostly sucks up on a daily basis? Okay, well, according to the International Energy Agency, in 2012, the top 10 oil-producing countries accounted for 65% of the world's oil production. So just 10. Just 10 countries basically made 2/3 of the daily oil produced every day. These 10, 2/3, okay? So yes, some other countries do some stuff on a daily basis, but we're just going to stick with the top 10 for now. Okay, who routinely is the biggest oil-producing countries on planet Earth? Russia, right this second, is number one in terms of production, with almost 11 million barrels a day. Saudi Arabia, right around the 10 million barrels a day. And I'm going to stop here and interject a little possible quiz question. Those are the two big players, it seems to me, because I keep going back and looking at data from the past and projections into the future. And pretty much for the next decade, again, unless something big changes technologically, the biggest producers are going to be Saudi Arabia, Russia, Russia, Saudi Arabia, Saudi Arabia, Russia, Russia, Saudi Arabia. These are two countries that just have several things aligned. They have a lot of oil, aligned with, they don't have really big populations, so they don't use a lot of oil. So they are big, big producers because they have big, big stocks of it, and obviously the technology to pull the stuff out. Who rounds out the rest of the top 10? This is where it may be a little bit surprising for you. The United States of America is the third biggest oil producer on planet Earth. What? People forget the United States is a big oil producer. Here's why they forget, by the way, because the United States is also one of the biggest oil importers. In fact, it is the biggest oil importer. How could that be? How can the United States be the third biggest oil producer on planet Earth and still have to import oil? Because the United States uses more oil than anyone else on planet Earth. They guzzle up all the oil that they make every day, and they need so much more, they got to import it from every place else on top of that. So the United States of America, and again, these numbers are a few years old, but this general ballpark does not change much year to year. United States of America produces about 8.5 million barrels a day, and then we, of course, are going to import another 10 or 11 on top of that. 10 or 11 million barrels, okay? So Russia, Saudi Arabia, the United States, Iran, big four right there. Iran is the number 4, consistently the number 4 biggest producer of oil every day. And after that it goes China, Canada, Iraq, UAE, Venezuela, and Mexico. What? Mexico? Where did they come from? Yeah, and again, depending on what list you look at, some other countries, once you get past the top 5, countries will fluctuate year to year in how much oil they produce, if they make the top 10 or not. So you'll often, year to year, see other countries float into the top 10, like Kuwait, like Norway, like Algeria, like Nigeria. So it fluctuates a little, but the top 20 producers, they're all kind of in there year in and year out. And maybe this is now getting a little bit redundant, but why those 10 or 20 consistently big producers? Well, one, you got to have it. You have to have it. So these are all countries that have big proven reserves. Now, China doesn't have that much in terms of oil, but how do they make in the top 3 or 4 or 5 producers? Well, because China's a big economy. They have some oil, not really a lot, and they suck it out of the ground as fast as they can, and they use it because they need it, because they're going to use every bit of it because they're a big growing economy. That won't be sustained indefinitely. China can't keep doing that. They don't have huge proven reserves like other countries. But if we kind of want to get some historical outlook on this, in terms of consistency, things that I would want you to learn. I'm not going to make you memorize the top 10. I've already told you it changes. But the top 5 kind of don't. And the top 4 really don't. So the top 4 oil-producing countries, year in and year out, producing, are Russia, Saudi Arabia, and they will consistently go back and forth as the number 1s and number 2 slot for some time. But also the United States of America and Iran. Those 4 are always cranking out the oil because they got a lot of it. Now, that's not to suggest that just because those 4 countries produce the most oil year in and year out on a daily basis, that they export all that oil year in and year out on a day-to-day basis. And here's where trends start to move away from each other. Before we get to the exporters, let's talk about who imports it then. Okay, so we've talked about who consumes it, kind of everybody, who's got it, the reserves of it, that's here, there, and everywhere, who produces it. There's these big 4 countries. Who has to import? And the trends here to think about are kind of like consumption. Who would be importing it? The people who consume the most of it, obviously, if they don't got a lot. So it's the richest, most industrialized places that don't got a lot of oil themselves, with some exceptions. So let's look at the list real quick. Who are the biggest importers of oil on a daily basis? If we looked at the European Union as a singular entity, they're number 1. They would finally, the United States would not take the top ranks for being the biggest user, consumer, drinker of oil on planet Earth. But that's only if you treat the European Union as a singular entity. Of course, the European Union has 24, 25, 26, 28 countries in it now. But if you took it as a singular entity, every day they import almost 12 million barrels of oil. Okay? But that's a supranationalist organization. It's not a country. What country imports the most oil every day? We're back to the United States. We're up there again. We're number 1. We're number 1 at using oil and importing it too. Okay, so the United States imports somewhere between 8 to 10 million barrels of oil a day, on top of the 8 to 10 that it produces every day. A little tear rolls down my cheek for planet Earth. Okay, who's number 2? China. And just as China's economy has been bolting forward and growing and just recently surpassed the United States economy, look for China's oil consumption and oil importation to continue to increase over the coming years and decades. So China's number 2, probably for not much longer. They don't have near as much proven reserves as even the United States does. So U.S., China, then India. Let's chill out there for a second. India? India, they haven't made too many of the big lists that we've covered so far. Well, China and India have 1 billion to 1.5 billion people each in them. If every single person in each of these countries just uses that much oil, that's a lot of oil every day. So the United States only has like 310 million citizens. They use a whole ton of oil. China and India, they don't use as much per person, but they got a lot of people, so they still make the top three. U.S., China, India, Japan, South Korea, Germany, and I'm just going to go really fast now here, not that you have to write all these down, because I'll just give you the graphic. India, Japan, South Korea, Germany, Italy, France, Netherlands, Singapore, Spain, the United Kingdom, Taiwan, Thailand, Canada, Belgium, Poland, Australia, Greece. Well, let's just stop there. That's probably about the top 20 importers. So again, to stress, hey, look at what the trend here is. A whole bunch of these entities are Europeans, like the majority, I think, maybe of what I just suggested. Germany, Italy, France, Netherlands, Spain, United Kingdom, Belgium. I almost said Canada, but what's the difference? Greece. So these are all places, Europe especially, that are fully rich, fully industrialized modern societies and modern economies that don't have oil themselves. Remember, Europe does not have a lot of oil. There's just not, like none. Yes, there's some in the North Sea in between the United Kingdom and Norway. And yes, both of those countries, Norway and the United Kingdom, are oil producers. But when you're looking at the amount of usage that goes on in Europe, no. All right? These are places that all have to import oil on a daily basis, and a lot of it. So added to those rich, industrialized European places are the population megaton countries of China and India, which use a lot simply by their numbers alone of population, and the United States and China, because they have really huge, big economies. Rich, industrialized economies. That start to make sense? So those are the people that have to buy it. I say people. I always want to make countries into people. These are the countries that have to buy it. Some of these countries have oil. Some of these countries produce oil. But all of these countries use so much oil that they make the top 10 or top 20 importers of oil list. Got it? Okay. Well, let's finish up with who actually makes the money off oil then? Because if your country, say the United States produces tons of oil, but it uses all that and then it has to go buy more. So it's like a deficit situation. Now, the United States has private companies that do all this, so it's not like Saudi Arabia where the state controls everything. But still, you're looking at movement of oil in and out of the United States. It's a negative. Yeah, U.S. makes a bunch, but it's got to buy a bunch. So no one's really, the country's not making money off of oil. It doesn't really figure into the GDP because it's like, oh, well, we made this much, but we bought that much. You see where I'm going with that? So who actually makes the green on oil? That would be the countries that export it. Export it. They're selling it for cash. And I love these graphics. Check out this thing. It's called a tree map. This is the crude oil export tree map from the Harvard Atlas of Economic Complexity. And it's just a piece of it. And I love these little graphics. They're a graphic slash kind of a map because these are listing countries by the percentage of exported petroleum in 2012. And it's just a nice, easy way to look at it and be like, oh, wow, you get a snapshot of it real quick. And they categorize the regions by color. So the Middle East is in green, and looks like Europe and Russia are in blue, and African countries are in purple. So and South American countries are in that red. So we see just from looking at it 1 second, oh, Saudi Arabia's got the biggest block here. Oh, Russia's got the next biggest block here. Hey, look over there. Nigeria's got a big block in Africa. Oh, look down there. Mexico's a major exporter. I know you don't ever think about these things. So these, and again, you can let your eyes kind of glaze over the graphic. These are the places that have oil. You must have oil in order to produce it. Then they also produce that oil. They're technologically equipped to do it. And then they don't need all their oil, so they sell it / export that oil. And now I'll just run through the most current, up-to-date top 10 of leading oil exporting nations. Obviously, the tree map has already tipped you off to a lot of them. Saudi Arabia, number 1. Russia, number 2. Iran, then Iraq. Nigeria, that's the one that may surprise you. United Arab Emirates, Angola, Venezuela keeps making those top 10s. Norway, I already referred to. Canada, we talked about that one as well. Mexico, Kazakhstan, Kuwait, Qatar, Libya, Algeria. There's a whole bunch of Middle Eastern countries listed here in the top 10. Indeed, there are. But just like I was talking about those 4 big producers of oil that are fairly consistent year in and year out. There's kind of 5 big exporting countries that for decades have been up there in the top 10 and probably the top 5. So the top 5 consistently biggest exporting oil countries are Saudi Arabia and Russia, Iran, Nigeria, and the United Arab Emirates. These are countries that have a bunch of oil and sell/export a bunch of oil. And you can see from this graphic, they've been doing it over the decades. So those are your big sellers, big exporters. And here's the trend for you to consider as I try to kind of wrap this up now. The trend for exporting is that these are peeps, countries / peeps. These are peeps that got tons and tons and tons of petroleum. So much petroleum that they couldn't use it all even if they wanted to. So they have an excess, okay? Countries with mega amounts of the resource and or low populations. So they don't have as much demand. They don't have huge numbers of people, so they don't need as much oil. And I would put in that category virtually all the countries of the Middle East, okay? I mean, Saudi Arabia is a decent, it's one of the biggest producers and exporters on planet Earth, but it's not a very populous country. Egypt next door is, and poor Egypt doesn't have any oil. Russia, you think, Russia's a really big country. Yes, Russia's the biggest country on planet Earth, but their population is only 150 million people. It's half the population of the United States. So both of those countries have huge amounts of oil and not as much demand internally. So you have excess oil to sell. And that's why those two are consistently big exporters on planet Earth. However, there were some other ones in there. The UAE would fall in that category as well. But there are some other ones to consider, and that is other major oil exporters there in the top 10 or top 20 are places that have a lot, perhaps, or even just some, even have some petroleum, but are not as industrialized, not as manufacturing based, don't have as many cars, don't have the same sort of standards of living of, say, the Europeans or the Russians or the Americans or even increasingly the Chinese. So not as many cars, not as much this, not as much that, not as much demand for oil. So you may be in a country that's like, well, we've got some oil, not a ton, but we're not at a point where our consumption's very high either. And we need the money more. So we have some oil. The local demand's not that much, and we prefer to go ahead and sell it. So we got that jack to use in our country to build schools and roads and stuff like that. Countries that fall into this category, perhaps obviously, are Nigeria. Nigeria's got a gigantic population, and they're expanding, okay, but they have a lot of oil, and they're not completely fully industrialized throughout the entire country compared to, say, the Netherlands or Italy. So Nigeria, major exporter. Most of the other countries of Africa that have oil, export oil, okay? Whether they have a little or a whole ton, they usually don't have the population, the local population that needs it. They don't have the industrialized need, the industrialized local demand, and they prefer to have the cash in hand to industrialize. So most of the other African states with any or significant oil resources export it, virtually all of it. Places like Angola or even South Sudan now. Pull it out of the ground and sell it. I mean, you need the money. Venezuela falls in this category, unfortunately, as well. It's a major part of their economy. They're closer to being industrialized, and they have a significant population, but they have all sorts of economic turmoil right now and have for some time. So they need the money. Export it, sell it. They also have a huge amount. Most of the Central Asian states fall into this category. Uzbekistan and Kazakhstan. They got a bunch and, yeah, sell it, take the money. Even Mexico, and this one's tricky for me to put in this category because I think Mexico always gets a bad rap, especially for America. Most Americans don't know anything about our southern neighbor. Mexico is a pretty industrialized society. Its standards of living are closing in on the same standards in America, or the United States, I should say. But Mexico has a lot of offshore oil in the Gulf, and they also need it for government budgets. And we're going to talk more in detail about this throughout this entire course, but certainly here about oil. Some of these countries that I've just named here in this second category of major exporters really heavily, seriously rely on oil revenue. And so whether the demand is, whether they have in-country demand or not, they're going to export as much as they can because they need the jack. And I'm going back to Venezuela. 95% of the export earnings of Venezuela are petroleum, period. 95% of what they export is petroleum. And it's 25% of their GDP. A quarter of their GDP is petroleum. I think maybe natural gas in there too, but it's a biggie. In Nigeria, go back to Africa, 90% of export earnings, 35% of their entire GDP, just petroleum. Libya, 95% of export earnings, half of their GDP, 50% of the country's GDP, just petroleum. Just petroleum. Angola, 45% of GDP. Algeria, 70% of their GDP. Saudi Arabia, some of the biggest reserves, one of the biggest producers, the biggest exporters. See how Saudi Arabia keeps ranking way up there at the top. The petroleum sector in Saudi Arabia accounts for 92.5% of budget revenues. That is, let's just call it 93. When I say budget revenues, 93% of the operating budget of the government is from petroleum. 93%. For the government to do everything, to build every school, every hospital, pave all the roads, build airports, pay all the civil servants, all of it. All that comes from petroleum, 93% of it. It's 90% of their export earnings. It's 55% of their GDP. In Iran, it's 80% of their export earnings and 20% of their GDP. In Iraq, it's 75% of their GDP. So now we're starting to pick off stuff in the Middle East. We're getting back to topic to wrap this up. Seems like a lot of these Middle Eastern countries not only had huge proven reserves and not only makes the top 10 production, but their top 10 or top 20 exports. And it seems like a lot of them are heavily reliant on these oil exports to make money. It's like the primary source of revenue for many of these Middle Eastern economies. Yep, that's true. That's a fair assessment. In fact, it's so important to many of the countries of the region that they formed a club, an oil club that you know as OPEC. And if we start to look at the OPEC members, which, by the way, BTW, not all of the OPEC members are from the Middle East. There are members from other parts of the planet. But if we start to look at, okay, we're just within this oil club, this group of merry countries that banded together to control their oil production and therefore control world price. A whole lot of these folks are from the Middle East and are in the top 10, top 20, top 30 biggest world exporters of oil. Namely, Saudi Arabia, we already said, is number 1 or 2. Iran is typically number 4 or 5. Iraq is typically number 6 or 7. The UAE is typically number 7 or 8. Venezuela, that's the wild card. They're always in the top 10. And then the top 20 is also Kuwait, Nigeria, Algeria, Angola, Qatar, Libya, and Ecuador. That's OPEC, and all of them are in the top 30 of the biggest exporting countries on planet Earth. Most of that list was in the top 10. Okay, so about half of the top 10 producers and top 10 exporters are OPEC members. Well, I mean, I guess that makes sense since we've now pointed out a couple times that the Middle East itself has about half the world's oil reserves. It has half the world's oil production and exports about half the world's daily oil. Yeah, so the OPEC peeps coming together in this cartel/conglomerate control about half the world's oil market. And in controlling half the world's oil market, they essentially outright control the price of petroleum, period, which trickles down directly to you every day when you pay at the pump as you fill your Hummer full to go joyriding. OPEC pretty much just slightly indirectly controls the price you pay at the pump. So, having said that, who is this all-powerful OPEC group, which affects everybody on planet Earth and how much they pay for stuff like fuel? Is it just Middle Eastern countries, since they have all the stuff? No, I've already pointed out that there are OPEC members from other parts of the planet. It's mostly Middle Eastern, though. And since they have so much oil there in the Middle East, and so much of the OPEC members come from the Middle East, I guess we can just assume that the Middle East and the OPEC countries have always controlled the price of oil and the flow of oil and everything else about oil, right? I mean, they have half, they control half, they produce half, they sell half. I mean, obviously, they've always controlled it. No, actually, not at all. Crucial changes have occurred just really in the last 50 years, 5 decades. And changes within the oil world have radically affected the economics and politics of the Middle East and of multinational corporations located all over the world. So to understand the role of OPEC and our modern economic political world and its petro-present, what's going on today, we actually have to go back in time. So let's first visit the ghost of petro-past to see how petroleum came to be controlled by these folks, then those folks, and now what's going on with it today.